Joining us now, an old friend of the program and mine, Roger Stone. You know what, Roger? It says seasoned political operative on my sheet about you. Seasoned. I love that. Seasoned.
When they don't want to say old, that's what they say.
Seasoned political operative, speaker, pundit, and New York Times bestselling author. Of course, Roger Stone joins us now. Roger, how are you? Good to talk to you.
I'm great. I spent the last 2 days closeted with my lawyers preparing for my testimony in the House Intelligence Committee on the 26th of September. Why do they call it that, by the way? The House Intelligence Committee. It's counterintuitive.
No.
If you've dealt with these people.
No.
And of course, you have a long line of Democrats, Adam Schiff, Jackie Speier, this character from Connecticut, who have maligned me in public sessions that I work for the Kremlin, that I'm I'm a Russian agent, blah blah blah. These are all lies, but now they want me to respond, of course, in closed session.
Yeah, did you beat your wife? Did you are you have you been a friend of Putin's?
Right, and they won't immediately release a transcript. That way they can mischaracterize, to the press what went on behind closed doors. It's a ridiculous process, but nonetheless, I'm going to go up there and make it very clear. The entire Russian myth is exactly that. It's a delusion. It's not collusion, it's delusion. It's a fairy tale. It's a fraud. They're grasping, and mostly because they want to distract from the fact that Hillary and the Podesta brothers were, in fact, in bed with the oligarchs around Putin. We're being paid millions of dollars. We're being paid enormous speaking fees. There was a presidential candidate in bed with a foreign power. Unfortunately, it was largely Hillary Clinton.
Roger, you used to work with Paul Manafort back in the day. Black Manafort and Stone was one of the most incredibly successful, powerful political consulting operations in the world. You know Manafort well. I mean, that firm ultimately, you guys all went your separate ways, but it looks like they wiretapped him last year as part of the incidental collection of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They pulled back on that wiretap because they found nothing, according to the New York Times. And then it looks like Jim Comey, brought it all back to another wiretap. It's like I wanted another bite at the apple after the election, and the president perhaps was dragged into that mess with the with the conversation with Manafort. Manafort at one point worked for Yevchenko in the Ukraine, and that was a source of much consternation over there at the establishment media.
He worked for Yanukovych.
Yanukovych, excuse me.
Right.
And tell us, for the people who are listening to this show across the country, Paul Manafort. I mean, I've had a chance to get to know him a little bit, and I like him. I mean, I don't know him well, but I like him.
First of all, I think the president owes him a debt of gratitude because he joined the campaign at a time that the president had just lost Wisconsin, had just lost Colorado, had just lost the delegates in North Dakota, had just had the delegates stolen from him in Louisiana. And the Republican establishment was looking at a 1952-style steal of this nomination at a convention in which they understood the rules better than the outsider upstart Donald Trump. And Manafort came in. His expertise is convention politics. He did a superb job of getting them organized, beating back an effort in both rules and credentials to grab the nomination away from Trump. When his business activities in Eastern Europe, all of which were perfectly legal, he represented Yanukovych in a democratic election that this country recognized, in a party this country recognized, and he was paid, which is entirely proper. Now you have an instance in which Mueller is attempting to pressure Manafort with some minor charge, find something and find nothing and make it into something, money laundering, tax evasion, whatever, and then go to Manafort and say, we know you were colluding with the Russians, just admit it all and tell us Trump knew everything. In other words, be John Dean, be the rat. Of course, it would all be fabrication. And we'll let you go. That's where we are right now. That's why they kicked in the door of his house at 5 o'clock in the morning, dreaming like a drug dealer, to take away documents they already had, that he'd already turned over through his attorneys. Go into his closet and photograph all of his expensive Italian custom-made suits What's that about?
Mm.
This is the path. Now, I don't think Paul Manafort's going to bear false witness against the president. I think there's zero chance that he's going to do it. They're trying to ruin this guy financially. They've destroyed his reputation. Yet there is still no evidence that he's done anything wrong, other than whatever Mr. Mueller can manufacture well beyond Russia, going into his, real estate dealings 20 years ago. Same thing, by the way, they're doing now for the president, looking into his past transactions.
Yeah, this is classic, though, is it not? It's classic when politics is criminalized. You use criminal law to try to defeat or intimidate your political opponents, remove them from office. Dershowitz, who's no fan of the president's policies, has said this repeatedly. He finds this investigation to be a total abomination based on no core crime.
The Democrats have always been better about this than we have been. I mean, look, the FISA court very clearly handed down papers that show that the Obama administration spied on at least 30,000 Americans in violation of the Constitution and the law. Brennan, Rice, Clapper, Rogers, et al., these people should be prosecuted. That's a far more serious civil liberties violation than anything that happened at Watergate. Nothing. We now know definitively, Clapper said under oath in front of Congress in 2017 that the Trump Tower did and Trump's associates were surveilled. Those conversations most definitely include yours truly, and the president, and Paul Manafort. We now have a new confirmation that they were wiretapping Manafort, and therefore his conversations with the president during the inauguration, during the presidential transition. Susan Rice says that she used surveillance material, and she unmasked people illegally, because she was concerned that the president-elect was setting up a back channel with the Russians, which would be his prerogative, and which would not be illegal, kind of like the back channel that Obama had to the Iranians. So, it's a Kafkaesque situation where Democrats violate the law with impunity, and James Comey and Mr. Mueller are going after Paul Manafort.
Well, and I have to say, at the same time, anyone who's ever had a conversation with a Russian business person is immediately suspect. Whereas you said, Bill Clinton traveled to Moscow. He spoke about what was the Russian bank. I mean, all these individuals, from former presidents to senators and congressmen, have made trips to Moscow and to St. Petersburg for a variety of business interests, to promote, the market economy, to try to, shine the light on how a market economy can actually be good for former Soviet Union. And anyone who does business now, apparently in Russia, is also suspect. Oh, that's a big list.
This is just a device. This is really simple. The neocons and the insiders who've been running American foreign policy under both Republicans and Democrats were really licking their chops over a war in Syria. A no-fly zone in Syria, expansion of the proxy war in Syria. And Hillary Clinton promised them this. Now along comes Donald Trump, and guess what? He'd like to try to negotiate. He'd prefer détente over thermonuclear war. He has no illusions about the Russians, who are really the problem here, but he'd like to try his hand at diplomacy and peace as opposed to war. Therefore, we have to make up this ridiculous narrative about Russia to discredit him. That's what they're really upset about. He's not soft on Russia. He'd like to negotiate before we start lobbing bombs. That's, I think that's noble, but not to the neocons. They like war and they want it now. It's really extraordinary. It's reverse McCarthyism. If you're not for war with Syria, well, you must be a traitor to your country. I had relatives mowed down by Soviet tanks in Budapest in 1956. I got into politics because of the anti-communism of Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. To accuse me of being in bed with the Russians is a stunning insult. I hate their system and everything about it. But I'm not for war if we can have peace under some reasonable terms.
Well, and that's where Ronald Reagan was. He didn't believe in these frequent military incursions, interventions. It was peace through strength, renew the American economy, and would be stronger and more powerful on the world stage and asserting America's interests when necessary, because the people back home would be happier. That was the whole point, like peace through strength, strength at home. Of course we need a strong military. But now it's all reversed.
Well, and in the meantime, even I think more seriously, there is a foreign power that is deeply involved in our presidential campaign, whose officials are without dispute meeting with John Podesta, meeting with the Clinton campaign, and that, of course, is Ukraine. Ukraine that is now selling missile technology to North Korea, those Ukrainians. But we don't see any investigation of that. We don't see a broad examination of that. Lee Stranahan, the investigative reporter, has done extraordinary work demonstrating how the Ukrainians were trying to intervene in our election and elect Hillary.
Well, yeah, no one's reporting it. No one's reporting it, though. Lee is, but nobody else.
It gets very little pickup. In the meantime, we find out that, somebody bought $100,000 worth of Facebook ads from Russia. The ads themselves are pretty poorly written, and they certainly don't mention Donald Trump. They seem like badly written issue ads by somebody who doesn't understand American politics. But unless somebody can prove that that the Trump campaign coordinated those ads or provided targeting technology or even knew about them, which nobody can, there's nothing there that's of any interest. $100,000 worth of Facebook ads didn't change anybody's mind.
It's ridiculous. I got to play a soundbite for you. Roger, can I play a soundbite for you before we let you go? This is Rob Meathead Reiner working with other policy elites on a Russia investigation. Let's listen.
The media does talk about it a lot, and for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be penetrating into what I refer to as the real Americans. I mean, patriotic Americans that wave the flag. It doesn't seem to get in and I think it's because it's complicated. It's very, very complicated to wrap your mind around all of the, what is cyber warfare? What have the Russians been trying to do since 1917, since they were the Soviet Union?
Let me tell you something. You are a meathead.
Now red baiting.
Yeah, red baiting. Go ahead.
I mean, Joe McCarthy is rolling around in his grave right now. That was some of the best demagoguery, fear mongering, name calling. That sounded like it was recorded in like 1938. Or even better, 54. I mean, was he upset about the Russians back in the 60s and 70s? Not so much.
No, I will say, Roger, where was he when we needed him in 1983 when we were pushing the Strategic Defense Initiative? And all the Hollywood was like, no to Star Wars. Remember, they were like, no Star Wars. You're militaristic. We'll go back and find his comments back then. Rob Reiner was all over that back then.
And when Reagan said tear down this wall, Rob probably said he's being unnecessarily provocative.
Oh, no. Roger Stone, I can't wait to hear more about what happens after you're with the so-called House Intelligence Committee next week, but I don't think they know it's about to hit them. Roger Stone here on the Laura Ingraham Show. Thank you so much. We'll take a break. Don't go.